are VHS cassettes everywhere. Why isn't this room clean?
I'll get to it. I'm just playing some Snaky Bus.
Well, get started. I'm gonna go work on the podcast.
Hey, Alan, I'll help you out. We'll get it done in no time.
1 hour later.
What are you guys doing?
We're cleaning the room.
Yeah, we're cleaning the room. Whoa!
You're just dancing in your underwear.
Correction. I'm Swiffering in my underwear.
What's your favorite bad movie?
Mom, have you seen my peanut butter?
High five. Neither are.
Jeez, that's not cranberry sauce.
You watch me.
Some movies are bad, some are just plain rotten.
I'm not bad, I'm just filmed that way.
Movies Among Us!
Welcome back to Bad Movies Among Us, the procurers of the best bad movies that your worst nightmares have to offer, and in honor of Gay Pride Month, we have a terrifyingly tantalizing treat queued up for you.
That's right, we have the unambiguously gay, gender-bending queer horror hit of 1985, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. Now, Alan, have you seen a lot of queer horror films?
I can't really say that I have. I've seen remarkably few, and most of the ones that I've seen have been really recent and really cheap.
You know, it's actually been more recently that it's been kind of more of a boon in the industry where more gay horror movies are being produced. I've seen a lot on Shudder.
Yeah, a lot on Shudder, which is nice to see, especially because there are so many gay horror fans. And, you know, what's sad is during this period, there was really so few gay horror movies.
Right. And Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is one of the more readily available queer horror films out there.
Right, if not one of the only ones that really came out in the 80s.
It really put a spotlight on like queer horror films because it was one of the only ones out there. And speaking of spotlights, it kind of reminds me of Pixar, you know, the Pixar logo. There's one Pixar movie in particular I've been really thinking about, and that's Inside Out. It's not the movie that we're doing for this episode, but it's a movie I think about a lot. In it, we follow a young girl, Riley, who is forced to move from a home she knows to a place that is different and scary and unfamiliar. And we watch as she tries to navigate the emotional hardships that come with moving to this new place. What makes Inside Out unique is that in the movie, we rarely interact with the character of Riley as a whole. Instead, we mostly see her through her individual emotions. You know, anger, fear, joy, sadness, disgust. Each personified as their own character, each with their own struggles and goals, each attempting to negotiate their place within her psyche. And within her psyche, connecting everything are these islands, called the Islands of Personality. And each island defines a core characteristic of Riley's persona. And each of these islands are crafted from a core memory. Now, a core memory is fundamental to who she is as a person. I'd like to think that one of my islands of personality is Nightmare Island. I guess you'd need to understand that I spent my late toddler years watching scary movies with my grandmother. At 4, I had seen John Carpenter's Halloween, and I was enamored with the Michael Myers character. Now, I watched these movies for the first time in the fall months of October and November of 1996, and young Nohea, this was all he could think about. So come December, when we were off to my paternal grandmother's house for our annual Christmas gathering, you can imagine my amusement when my cousin came out with a special gift just for me. It's not wrapped, but it doesn't matter, because into my hands he places a dual VHS pack. The cover is striking and it immediately grabs my attention. It was colored yellow and red with the flames in the background, 2 poster images, and a red banner at the top that read,
Double the horror.
I imagined that my palms greased with sweat from excited anticipation. The top left poster showed a girl pulling the covers of her blanket over her, while above a clawed hand came through her bed's headboard. A Nightmare on Elm Street, starring Robert Englund on the right. But it was the bottom right poster that interested me the most, because it showed the main man himself far more clearly than the first poster did. On the bottom left corner of the poster was a suburbia painted blue by the moonlit sky. But tearing through that moonlit sky was Freddy Krueger, with no less than the flames of hell behind him. A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Freddy's Revenge, also starring Robert Englund. I remember pulling out the 2 tapes from the double pack and gave the first one a quick check, front and back. I lingered on the back for a bit. wanting another glimpse of Freddy Krueger, aside from the two the box had already provided. All I got was a small still of him on fire on top of some no-name extra. Still, the scene looked horrific. I was so excited. The other still showed the film's protagonist, Nancy, as she looked over her shoulder, as if someone were watching her. Probably Freddy Krueger. Still, the scene looked so horrific and I was so excited. The other still showed the film's protagonist, Nancy, as she looked over her shoulder as if someone were watching her. Probably Fred Krueger. I put the VHS aside. The other VHS was even more mysterious than the first. The stills were smaller, about the size of an icon. One showed Freddy slashing a shirtless man in the back. The second showed a close-up of a woman's face, the film's main love interest. Take note that I say love interest here and not leading lady, because Kim Myers isn't the star of Nightmare 2. The final still showed the film's protagonist, Jesse, with Freddy's claw tearing out of his hand. To say I was dying with anticipation to watch it would be an understatement, but my dreams would be dashed, sadly. All of my attempts to play the movie at the time would be unfruitful, as I would soon find out that there wasn't a working VHS player at my grandmother's house, and the remainder of my family was not too keen on trying to help me find a way to play a graphic 80s slasher when I should be playing with my cousins or conversing with the family. Tragically, all the efforts of 4-year-old Nohea could muster were not enough. Alas, the movie would have to wait until I got home. And although it seemed like ages, we finally got home. And when we finally got there, I ran straight to the living room, VHS cassette in hand. I turned on the TV, turned on the VHS player, and...
Nohea, it's time for your bath.
Freddy would have to wait. I bathed as fast as I could. Faster than I've ever bathed before. Like, fastest. I hardly dried from the lackadaisical effort I put into drying myself. I was still wet as I sat in front of the TV and started the movie. Right away we're greeted to the eerie, mood-setting sounds of Freddy Krueger's boiler room. You don't see him at all for those first few shots. All you can see are his feet as he walks through the boiler room. You see his hands as he constructs something. Something that you eventually realize is a bladed finger. One of 3 others that all fit onto a glove to create a claw. A claw that I just knew could tear somebody apart. He thrust the glove through some sort of netting while mimicking a death cry. No, hey, it's time for dinner! No! So I ate dinner, scarfed it down. I ran back into the room, turned off the lights, and put on the movie. Nightmare on Elm Street became my favorite horror movie that night. It stayed that way 2.5 decades later. After I finished it, I was hungry for more. So I put on part 2 immediately then and there. But alas, it was bedtime. Ooh. Part 2, unfortunately, would have to wait for the morning. But I was still riding off that Elm Street glow of watching the first one for the first time. And I know what some of you are thinking. You set a 4-year-old in front of a horror movie like Nightmare on Elm Street, and they're bound to have nightmares. But I don't think I did. I liked Freddy Krueger too much. I can say that I've maybe had 2 Freddy nightmares in my lifetime, and they were all in my college years. No, the first movie to give me nightmares as a kid was Tales from the Dark Side. You want something that'll keep you up at night, check out that gargoyle segment at the end. Ugh. The next day I watched Nightmare 2 for the first time, and I liked it. It would be years before I'd see parts 3 and 4, because my Blockbuster didn't have it. I saw part 5 and 6 in the meantime, but I didn't like them nearly as much as parts 1 and 2. For me, 2 had the scariest Freddy of all the Nightmare entries. You might notice that only men die in Nightmare 2, and that might have had something to do with it. The thought of Freddy Krueger ripping out of my insides with that claw of his scared me a lot. So while Nightmare 1 was my favorite horror movie, I love 2. But you know how as we grow older, our tastes and things kind of change? Nightmare 2 was about to go on a little journey with me. A voyage, if you will. When I was in elementary school, I had a lot of small crushes on girls. Minor infatuations that eventually passed. In the 3rd grade, there was a girl in my homeroom I eventually realized was my next door neighbor. So yes, I had a crush on the girl next door, and the girl next door's little sister had a crush on me. It was complicated. But come middle school, almost 3 years later, the girl next door had moved back to Oregon, and my sexuality started to lean. I was still in the closet, and I was basically just trying to cling to being straight for a couple more years. But thinking back, there was one boy crush that kind of stood out. Call him Reeves. Reeves and I were a lot like Grady and Jesse from Nightmare 2, me being Jesse and Reeves being Grady. There was a lot of roughhousing, but we also had a lot of good talks. I had a crush on him that lasted throughout middle school, and it ended right around the start of high school. So high school comes along. It was around the time that I got a little more serious about watching all the movies again, and kind of ranking them as a whole. My best friend Jaron and I would do these rankings for all the horror movies franchise we'd watch. We had already done Halloween, Saw, and Jason. Now it was time for Nightmare. So where did my ranking of Part 2 land in this mid-2000s ranking between best friends? Dead last. But keep in mind, I was pretty closeted at the time. And if you watch Nightmare 2, all the subtext is there.
Daddy can't help you now.
Something is trying to get inside my body, says Jesse.
Yeah, and she's female and she's waiting for you in the cabana and you want to sleep with me?
Says Grady. Every time Jesse screams in this movie, it's a high-pitched wail that many I know laugh at for its feminine qualities. The coach catches Jesse in a gay bar donned in leather. The same coach is later whipped, tied, and slashed by Freddy. Closeted Nohea wanted to keep Nightmare 2 buried at the bottom of his list, even though Part 5 only has 3 kills. Even though Part 6 is mostly comedy, a la Looney Tunes. Even though there's a remake, I didn't want to be anywhere near Nightmare 2. I stayed away from that movie for a long time. When I was 24, I moved away from my island home in Hawaii, and left for the mysterious opportunities and adventures that awaited me on the mainland. It was there where I kind of found my footing. Back home, I had Jaren and a few other movie buffs. But here, I had people that actually liked horror movies, and wanted to talk about them. I settled really quickly, within a year. I met a guy, and although he said he didn't really watch a whole lot of movies, I made him watch a few with me. He didn't really like scary movies, and after watching Hereditary and having it upset him very badly, we saved horror movies typically for the month of October. I got him interested in the Nightmare franchise based on our shared interest in the Freddy character. He was more familiar with The Simpsons' Treehouse of Horror 6 version of Freddy than with the actual movies themselves. That version of Freddy is actually very similar to the remake's portrayal of Freddy, except they stupidly decided to go with Freddy being guilty of pedophilia for the remake. Last year, we decided to go through a single horror movie franchise from beginning to end. And with Nightmare on Elm Street being my favorite horror movie franchise, I chose that. There were many first-time watches in that franchise for him, and it was very nice to see the franchise through a fresh pair of lenses. 2 stuck out like a thumb with all the gay context. It quickly became his favorite one. He wanted to know more about it, and I was vaguely aware of the controversy behind this movie. I had no idea that Mark Patton, who had played the film's lead role of Jesse, had not only disappeared from America shortly after the film's release, but that he had also gone on a similar journey of acceptance as I. But let's step back for a moment and talk about the heart of Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Mark Patton. Arguably, without Mark, you wouldn't have the cult classic the movie is called today. Yes, he screams like a girl. Yes, he has that hilarious dance number halfway through. And yes, he goes through all of those horrors of the movie with the vulnerability of a twink boy. But that's honestly the worst you could say about his performance. If you take into account that writer David Chaskin intended when writing the project, an innocent boy being invaded by something evil, it comes across as 100% authentic. Mark Patton grew up in the countryside of Missouri to 2 religious parents. His parents divorced when Mark was 14, and from that point on, Mark became the mom of the family, taking care of everyone within that family. He's always said that he knew that he was gay when he was as young as 4 years old. He remembered an imaginary play session where he was building a pillow fort that would be a castle where he would be marrying the king, something he knew he wasn't allowed to do, and something he knew he could get in trouble for if others found out, so it had to be done in secret. When Mark graduated high school, he followed a teacher's advice to leave his small little town and pursue an acting career, and so he did. He left town for New York. Years later, he would lament about this time, about how his father seemed to feel as though Mark had abandoned him and the family. But Mark knew that if he had stayed, he wouldn't be safe. Social tolerance wasn't on the same level back then, and being openly gay, well, in most places, was not safe. And he didn't want to die on a back road somewhere, so New York was safety. And as soon as Mark moved to New York, opportunities came flying to him. He moved into a hotel, and coincidentally one of the tenants down the hall was an inspiring actor as well. An actor who had an agent, which Mark did not. Mark, who knew next to nothing at the time about needing an agent or working for an agency, literally followed this newfound friend one day as he went to work. On the front door of the agency, a large sign read, "Do not knock. Please slide your resume under the door and we will contact you." And well, Mark, of course, he knocked. He just stood there and knocked until someone came to see who the hell it was. The executive who answered the door may have been a bit miffed, but miffed or not, Mark was a looker, and he knew that Mark had a face that he could make money off of. He quickly got a job at the agency, made some commercials that aired nationally, and got some of the cash flow going. It seemed like everything was meant to be. And Mark told himself that if he didn't find something big within the next 5 years, he'd go back knowing that he at least tried. 5 years later, Mark opened on Broadway with Cher, Karen Black, and Sandy Dennis, with Robert Altman directing Comeback to the Five and Dime Jimmy Dean. The musical followed a group of James Dean fans as they revisited each other and faced problems both new and old. Mark's character, Joe Quayle, notably became trans halfway through the show, later portrayed by Karen Black and going by the name Joanne. During his time with Jimmy Dean, Mark met many actors that treated him as a peer, and he was dazzled by the limelight. He was starstruck by Cher and felt like she was the true vision of what it meant to lead a Hollywood life. While at the theater, he met Robin Williams, was kissed by David Bowie, and had seen the Rolling Stones in person. After a short run on Broadway, Robert Altman took the original cast and made the production into a movie. The next year, Mark was at the Cannes Film Festival with the rest of the cast, showing the movie to the world. Later that year, Mark was scouted to go to LA for a pilot season. Although he wasn't prepared to go, Mark decided to take the leap, jumping headfirst into the limelight. Mark moved from his flat in New York to a house in South Pasadena where he lived with a friend named Jeffrey Marcus. Jeff was likewise running the pilot season circuit and had talked to a friend who he thought might be interested in hiring Mark. Jeff had only described Mark to the guy as cute. Nonetheless, the guy was excited to meet him. Later that day, Mark met who he described as his destiny, Timothy Patrick Murphy. Murphy had been in the industry for a few years by that time, but still the two became instantly enamored with each other and moved in with each other like a snap. And they lived a privileged life together. They were neighbors to Madonna, who Mark liked to spy on. After years of supporting roles in Hollywood, Mark was finally ready to take on his own leading role. In 1984, Mark's big opportunity would arrive. After auditioning for the leading role alongside such names as Matt Damon and Brad Pitt, Patton was cast to play the lead role of Jesse in the groundbreaking sequel to the 1983 smash hit Nightmare on Elm Street. In an age where plenty of young, fresh actors were getting their big breaks in horror, and we're talking big names here like Jennifer Aniston in Leprechaun, George Clooney in Return to Slaughter High, and Brad Pitt in Cutting Class. And these actors' careers were just taking off. This seemed like a no-brainer to Mark. And the previous film had Johnny Depp, which saw his career take off, like a flash. The 1983 smash hit Nightmare on Elm Street. Nightmare 2 director Jack Shoulder says he cast Mark Patton because Mark had the vulnerability they were looking for, which is just coded language calling him a Nancy boy. Mark had never seen the original movie, so after landing the role, he and a friend watched the original movie together, and by the end of it, Mark was asking himself just what he got himself into. There is so much gore, so much makeup, and so much special effects. Well, effects is what he got himself into. Mark was involved in so many special effects that he was under the brush just as much as Robert was. And Robert had to be made up as Freddy every time he was on scene. England was already sort of used to being under that amount of makeup from the first film. And although Robert wasn't quiet about his dislike for the makeup, reportedly tearing it off at the end of the day and forcing the makeup department to pick up the pieces like trails of breadcrumbs leading to Robert's trailer, Patton was new to the process altogether, and because of the nature of his effects, he could be stuck in a chair for 4 or 5 hours before filming could even begin. Mark wasn't aided by the fact resources were already being spread far too thin. The effect and somewhat rushed production put stress on the crew and production in general. For perspective, the film's climactic pool scene was shot only 3 months before the film's release. Post-production, going back home to New York, Mark described Times Square as being covered head to toe in Nightmare on Elm Street. It was an immersive experience, he said. He went into the movie theater, kind of a nobody, and came out a movie star. Everyone is ecstatic. They loved the movie. Everything was all fine and dandy until the reviews came out. The movie was steeped in homosexual undertones. The film's protagonist wasn't the combative jock they had come to expect from your standard male protagonist. Instead, it was this Nancy boy. The film's director and crew claim they were completely oblivious to all of this. Robert Englund, however, remembers discussing the film's gay elements with Robert Russler, who portrayed Grady in the film. Robert was actually somewhat excited to lean into it. He knew that Freddy Krueger scared boys just as much as girls, and he was eager to prey on that fear. The big scene where Freddy finally reveals himself to Jesse, shoving him against the wall, whispering, "Daddy can't help you now." Freddy's hands trace Jesse's jaw while the glove brushes his hair gently out of the way. Apparently, Robert wanted to take it a bit further and put the tip of the blade into Jesse's mouth. The makeup artist on set rushed over to Mark and told him not to do it because it looked like he was giving the glove a job. And how could they not realize that this was a gay movie? Jesse literally dreams about wandering into an S&M joint and finds his high school gym teacher clad in some very, very revealing leather. Said gym teacher is then pelted with balls, then tied up with jump rope in what is clearly a nod to BDSM. He's stripped naked, he's whipped with towels, and slashed across the back. Later in the movie, Jesse flees from Lisa and runs to Grady's house where he asks him if he can sleep with him. He's afraid of Freddy entering his body, a euphemism within the film, not only for the difficulties and fears that come with sexual maturity for gay youths, but also the issues of negative self-image and social ostracization that all too often come with homosexuality. Grady shuns this at first, wondering why he would want to sleep at his house with him when he could be sleeping with Lisa. But he eventually obliges. Later that night, his Freddy homosexuality literally bursts out of him and kills Grady. Guy kills Guy, who he has an unrequited attraction towards. Kind of like Jeffrey Dahmer. The movie has so much homosexual subtext that it just about stops being subtext and becomes just text. What Mark owned. Following the film's release, his agent pulled him aside, telling him that he would never be able to play a passable straight character again. Saying that if he wanted to play a passable straight leading man, those were the only clothes he was allowed to wear to auditions. From now on, he'd have to play a character actor. He'd have to pretend to be straight, all in an effort to conceal Mark's sexual identity. The year that A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 opened in America, the AIDS pandemic was making headlines, infecting many gay men in the Hollywood circuit. Actresses began refusing to work romantic scenes with men they thought were gay. Actors who were gay found themselves quickly going back into the closet as Hollywood casting agencies began demanding proof of being AIDS-free. Rock Hudson was the first big-name movie star to pass away of the disease. He was a Hollywood leading man who was outed by the media shortly before his passing. Rock's death shocked the nation and sent Hollywood into a panic. Mark was losing friends and quickly, but not just due to the hysteria, also because of the disease. There was no treatment at this time, and people who were becoming infected had no reliable timetables they could work with. Many of them were fine one day and then suddenly fading the next. Mark saying, "That's when you knew what it was like to see walking zombies. How one day you'd see a hot, good-looking man, and then the next day they'd be somebody's grandpa. And if you never saw them again, well, you just assumed the worst." And then it came knocking on Tim's door. Mark's Tim. Mark remembers having a small argument with Timmy, where the latter was having a photo shoot in their house, and Mark needed to be gone. Annoyed, he broke up with Timmy. He described their relationship as contemptuous, so they broke up a lot. There were rumors of Tim contracting AIDS, and when Mark eventually questioned him, they finally told him. Mark was devastated. It completely broke him. The AIDS epidemic painted the LGBT community as a boogeyman, not too different from Freddy Krueger himself. They were scared of the boogeyman, and wanted the boogeyman gone and buried. In a sense, you can sort of understand why it inspires a generation of homophobia throughout the 90s. So you have Mark, who has just experienced the loss of his partner, a community who treats the real him like the boogeyman from a movie, and an agency who is telling him to butch up and go back into the closet. So what's a girl to do? You say f*** it and leave. Mark walked away from his acting career and retreated away from the public eye completely. He moved to Mexico and eventually found his way to Puerto Vallarta. And he was eager to just start over completely and not have any connection to his previous ties. They were hard and difficult memories after all, and there Mark stayed for decades, forgetting about his life in Hollywood, forgetting about his time on Nightmare on Elm Street, forgetting about all the pain and trauma all that brought, and tried to start anew. And for all intents and purposes, he was successful. Coinciding with the franchise's remake of the original movie, Never Sleep Again, the Elm Street legacy sought to gather everyone you could think of involved with the franchise from the very beginning. And their goal was to tell the most definitive behind-the-scenes story you could tell about Freddy Krueger, and the house that he built, aka New Line Cinema. And the documentary had everybody, except for all the A-listers like Johnny Depp, Patricia Arquette, Lawrence Fishburne, and Mark Patton of all people. But wait, Mark Patton wasn't an A-lister, so what gives? Well, you see, Mark hadn't been in contact with anybody for the 20 years that he spent away. The documentary crew hired a private investigator who followed a paper trail that led him to Puerto Vallarta, where he finally found Mark. Mark had lived an entire lifetime in his time away. When he first moved down there, no one knew about his life as an actor, and he was glad of it. He didn't want anybody to know. He opened up a gallery and started painting. He married a local man named Hector, and now they manage the shop together. Mark says they are very famous in Puerto Vallarta. They call us the Prada of Puerto Vallarta. He left for the Elm Street Legacy Tour in 2010, marking the 25th anniversary of the second film of the franchise. It was the first time that many people saw Mark for the first time in years. He was amazed by the amount of hate that the film had. But he was also amazed that the film had garnered so many beloved cult fans, many of them queer and looking up to him as a role model. Mark would use his position as a gay role model as a jumping-off point, becoming a gay activist in more recent years. Speaking about AIDS, speaking about being a survivor himself. Mark is proud of Nightmare on Elm Street 2 now, and regards it as one of his babies. He's proud for having changed the conversation on Nightmare 2.
Pre-production for Nightmare on Elm Street 2 began in April of 1985, with the movie itself releasing in November of the same year. The movie was produced by Robert Shea and directed by Jack Shoulder. The film was written by David Chaskin. It's most notable for being one of the only mainstream gay movies of the era. It cost around $3 million at the time of production to make, and made just short of $30 million in the box office, making it an outstanding commercial success. Let's get down to the cast and crew. Nightmare on Elm Street 2 stars Mark Patton, the scream queen of all your dreams, the one, the only, Jesse Walsh. Kim Myers, as the Lisa, a well-established beard determined to become main game.
Robert Russler plays Grady, a don't-ask-don't-tell style friend. Clu Gulager as Mr. Walsh, the only one rightfully not concerned about Freddy.
Freddy? Freddy who? Freddy. I don't have any time for Freddy. There's a blue jay up there, man. Didn't you see it? That thing's gonna kill me.
Blue Jay killed my father.
Hope Lang as Mrs. Walsh, a loving mother who just doesn't know how to have that conversation. Marshall Bell as Coach Schneider by day.
The Master Schneider in Hexen.
Melinda O'Fee as Angela Walsh. Better keep your mitts off my Fu Manchu. Sydney Walsh as Carrie. I don't care who died, that party rocked.
And finally, Robert Englund as our man behind the mask himself, everyone's favorite bisexual assault artist, Freddy Motherfucking Krueger. We didn't have any actual car horns.
Yeah, so we had to make it up.
Sorry. I think that brings us down to our reviews from the internet. And as always, I've pulled a 5-star review and a 1-star review from the annals of the internet for you. For our 5-star review today, we have a review from a kids review website. So our review is from Kids Review, and section 658, a 13-year-old teen says that this movie is appropriate for anyone 1 year older than she is. Section 658 says, still scary after many years. Violence galore, swearing. Parents and kids should know that A Nightmare on Elm Street is a horror movie classic about the soul of a child murderer who continues his killing by killing teens in their dreams, thus killing them in real life. This movie is full of violence, blood, and deep cuts. In one scene, Freddy cuts his chest to reveal maggots and green goo. One of Freddy's victims rips off his burned skin on his face to reveal a pretty scary skeleton face. In an iconic scene, Freddy extends his arm, and it looks pretty fake, but creepy. Teen sex is heard, and is heavily implied. The heroine takes pills and meds to stay awake. The heroine's mother then tries drugging her own daughter to go to sleep out of fear of sleep deprivation will affect her negatively. Some rough language.
You realize that was for the first movie, right?
It was posted on the second movie.
But everything that's happening within that review is from the first movie.
It was written by a 13-year-old.
I guess you can't count.
And I guess I can't pay close enough attention. For our 1-star review today, we have a review by Vertigo1421 entitled, What the Heck Was I Thinking as a Kid?
Vertigo says, when they released all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies again, I was glad to get my hands on number 2, 3, and 4 in the series. And no sooner did I watch them, did I wonder what the heck I was thinking when I was a kid. Number 2 is the worst. I think I used to like the idea of Freddy possessing some weirdo kid, but geez, that might have been a fine tale to tell if the actors weren't such giant nerds. Especially the lead, Jesse Walsh, played by Mark Patton, in what has to be the most forced bit of acting I've ever seen. And that really spoiled everything from the start, especially as he takes loud gasps between dramatic dialogue. Save maybe Robert Russler, who plays Ron Grady, this movie just isn't worth the time. It is indeed the worst of the series, and there were quite a few bad ones. Actually, if you're looking to watch this series, I'd recommend Nightmare on Elm Street 3, probably the best in the series, and the one with arguably the best special effects. Some rough language.
So, you're telling me you have 2 reviews that are both recommending 2 different movies from the franchise.
Yeah.
We're off to a great start.
But you know, it really doesn't matter if those reviewers are suggesting other Nightmare on Elm Street movies to you. What matters is this Nightmare on Elm Street movie for you?
Well, the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise is kind of like a box of chocolates. There's a bunch of chocolates that you know you're going to love, and you pick those chocolates first. And then there's the rest of them that are kind of funky. And then there's the ones that are either you convince your partner to eat or you just toss them straight away into the trash. Nightmare 2 is kind of like the middle of those 3. It's super funky. It's a taste that I've acquired through time, though. It's a cult movie. And it's one of the most unintentionally gay movies you'll ever see. And there's just something fun in that, right?
Well, with all of that lead up, I suppose there's nothing to it but to do it. Let's get into this bad movie, shall we, no, huh?
Yes!
Let's get into Nightmare on Elm Street 2,
Freddy's Revenge.
No matter how you may feel about this movie as a whole, there's really no way you can love the intro. It just sets such an ominous tone right away, and it's using nothing more than a school bus in a suburban road. A school bus that seems to be barreling down the center of that road at just an alarming pace. We see the word nightmare slashed into the screen, followed by Freddy's Revenge in large, cold steel letters. There's something about the way the bus driver is driving the bus, too. Not quite in the center of the road, and just a little off to the right side instead of the left, with this barely noticeable swerve back and forth that gives his driving its own feeling of uncanniness. But then all of a sudden the music shifts, and the bus just slows down, aligning itself with the left side of the road again, and the ominous music in the background kind of just disappears. We open up on a normal suburban road of what we can only assume to be Elm Street. The school bus driving down the road is actually being driven by Robert Englund, but without the Freddy makeup on. This is a big foreshadowing alert to anyone watching. Robert drops off the kids at the end of the school day, and sitting back in the end of the bus is this total dork who's just sticking out like a sore thumb. He's the only one on the bus who's hunched over quietly and awkwardly, and not conversing with anyone. This is Jesse, aka Mark Patton, and he's going to be our Nancy boy for Nightmare 2. And he is also one of the only Nancy boys in the franchise, as well as one of the only Nancy boys in horror in general. So, we'll get to know a lot about Jesse over the next hour and a half. And for some reason he looks pale and sickly in this scene, probably to emphasize how much of a dork he is. But somewhere between the greasy hair with finger-length bangs, the soft blue polo shirt with the pocket protector included, the pound cake style stage makeup they used prior to shooting, at some point there they may have gone a little bit too far. Definitely not his best looking scene. Don't worry though, we will get a much, much cuter Mark Patton, and he will be arriving shortly to sort everything out. Eventually, it's just Jesse and 2 other girls on the bus. One of the girls looks back and just goes, "Oh no! Oh look who's behind us!" And at this point, they both turn around and start giggling at poor Jesse, much to his dismay. So he gives up and he tries his best to ignore the girls, but this is when the bus driver misses one of the girls' stops, and it becomes apparent that something is wrong. The bus begins to speed up, the driving becoming erratic again, and we can see the end of the road up ahead, but the bus doesn't seem to be slowing down. If anything, it seems to be speeding up. Speeding up as it jumps the curb, driving off of the road and into the desert. We can hear the screams of the 3 teenagers still trapped inside, as the bus driver shifts gears, and we notice that Freddy is now driving the bus in costume. The bus jumps and jolts through the desert terrain, eventually coming to a complete stop, and the ground begins to crumble from beneath them. The ground begins slowly falling away until all that is left is a tiny sliver of land, the bus becoming stranded atop a small mesa. We see them perched there, rocking back and forth, with nothing more than a few square feet of rock between them and a fire chasm of death below. Lightning flashes, striking the bus. As we switch back to the interior, the teens now terrified, the bus driver stands up, revealing Freddy Krueger for the first time, and he laughs menacingly as he begins to approach the three screaming teens. Scratching the bus chairs, one at a time as he slowly approaches, closing the distance, he lifts his claw into the air and begins scraping it along the ceiling, the blades screeching against the metal. Realizing there's no way to go, the teens all flee to the back of the bus, and as the teens huddle together, the weight of the bus begins to shift. In response, the bus begins to tilt backward, and Freddy, still approaching, raising his claw along the ceiling of the bus as he walks, the metal blades hissing as he approaches, screaming, knowing they're all about to die. All hope seems lost. Then all of a sudden we see the blood, gore, and viscera of sliced tomato. We see Mrs. Walsh, played by Hope Lang, no relationship to Jessica Lange, and she is cutting up tomatoes for breakfast, which, I don't know if Ken is dieting or what, but sliced tomatoes did not a breakfast make. She doesn't even salt them, and these are like big hunkin' slices of tomato. I mean, they are beefy. Alongside this, he gets a standard breakfast of bacon and eggs as well, and we never even see him touch the sliced tomatoes, so I don't know who they think they're fooling with the diet at this point, but it's obviously all for show, and they're the only ones still watching. Thankfully, we get to step away from all this for a second as we hear Jesse scream upstairs. And it's pretty funny because you can almost feel the collective embarrassment in the room. Angie even draws attention to it. She asks her mom, "Why can't Jesse just wake up with everyone else?"
Jeez, Mom, why is Jesse such a little
She just casually remarks as she continues to eat her creepy oriental zombie-themed breakfast chew. "Oh, he's just having bad dreams," she responds. Now we get a little more directly introduced to Jesse at this point. We switch over to his bedroom, and it is overstuffed with boxes and moving crap. We get to see Jesse. He is dressed in his tidy whities, and he is drenched in sweat. I mean, head to toe. Like a lot of sweat. Like enough sweat that a good parent might actually check to see if there was an underlying medical condition. And that should at least give you some kind of idea of the movie we're about to watch. He gets out of bed, and he gets out of bed and standing there in his tidy whities, he just full on readjusts himself right there in front of the camera. He just grabs himself. He pulls those tidy whities right open. And he just tosses it from left to right. And Jack Shoulder, he saw this shot and he just said to himself, yes. Yes, 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 yes. This is the shot that we're going to use. I want the shot of the boy awkwardly adjusting himself in the morning after his first homoerotic nightmare. That is the shot that I need for my movie. You know what I mean? I just want to capture that semi-solid state of confusion. The one that comes just after the guilt-ridden pinnacle of a dreamscape subconsciously imagined post-pubescent homoerotic nightmare. I want to capture that very essence right there. And I think he did that. I think Shoulder got what he wanted in that shot. But switching back to the breakfast table, we get to see Angie, Jesse's sister, and she is digging through her cereal box. She's eating a box of Fu Manchu, and she is just digging through that box in search of the Fu Man fingers that lie at the bottom. And Jesse, now at the table, he is all cleaned up and he is looking snazzier than ever. His hair's looking good, he's got this stylish 80s buttoned up, unbuttoned look, and somebody must have taken the squeegee to him because he no longer looks like a Kalamata olive. See, I told you we'd have a cute Mark Patton in no time. Angie finally finds her fingers in the bottom of her Fu Manchu, and putting them on, they are blood red, long, and they look sharp, and kind of like Freddy claws. It does kind of make you wonder if maybe Jesse was binging on his sister's Fu Manchu last night before bed, and that's what caused his night terrors, The sugar, the fingers, the weird oriental zombie mascot. It would explain the sweats as well. Not to mention why he's so opposed to having any more cereal in the morning. Off stage we hear the doorbell ring, And who could that be? Oh my gosh, it's Jesse's beard, or, Lisa. Whatever her name is, it's Lisa. Jesse shouts as he rushes outside, ignoring his father's questions. And this is where we get to meet Lisa, or rather the back of Lisa's head really, as she's facing the opposite direction at first. She turns around with an angelic smile and says, "Hi." In any other Nightmare on Elm Street, Lisa would probably be your main protagonist. She definitely looks the part, right? But this is the gayest of the nightmares. And this is Jesse's show. Apparently Mark Patton, who portrays Jesse, had a hand in picking Kim Myers to play Lisa. She was chosen mostly for a resemblance to a young Meryl Streep, and I can see it.
Oh my god, I can see it too. She does look like Meryl Streep. I mean, she's not as talented or as pretty or high class, but in the right light, you can totally see how she could be the perfect Meryl Streep.
Oh God, you've got him going again.
Jesse has apparently worked out a deal to take Lisa to school every morning, and it's clear he's trying to court her, but not really because he's into her. More because Jesse hasn't quite, come out of the closet yet. And at school, we get to see Jesse in PE class, and this is where we first get to meet Grady, everybody. Played by Robert Rustler, he's introduced to us as the popular jock type, and he is playing baseball with Jesse. He lets us know it's him with a little booty shake as he comes up to bat and knocks a baseball right into Jesse's head. Meanwhile, Lisa's hanging out with her best friend Carrie while they have archery class, and this is right alongside the baseball team's game, which, again, very unsafe. Super unsafe. But then again, it was the 80s, which means as soon as you stepped out of the safety of your house, day-to-day life was essentially just the Hunger Games. Carrie is egging on Lisa, trying to find out if she's getting in or not, which embarrasses Lisa, because obviously she's not to Jesse anyway. Jesse, who's supposed to be playing baseball, is obviously either distracted by Carrie or Grady, or possibly both. And because he isn't really paying attention to the game, he gets hit in the head by that runaway ball. A whole bunch of other students surround him, trying to find out if he is okay, but Coach Snyder is upset. He's upset that Jesse got smacked in the face by that ball. He asks Jesse for a second if he's okay, and then immediately switches over to scolding him for not paying attention. Jesse barely manages to get out a brief little, "Yes, Daddy." Wait, that's not what he says. Grady gives Jesse a friendly little pat on the cheek before the game continues. And as the game continues on, the next batter, he hits one low and easy to the center outfielder. Grady finds himself caught between the bases. In an attempt to save himself, he darts back and forth frantically before diving between Jesse's legs. Grady, so upset, and so totally not gay, just pulls Jesse's pants down in frustration to reveal his very revealing jockstrap. But again, just listen to the director, If you listen to Shoulder, he will tell you this is not a gay movie, it just has gay subtext.
Oh, honey, that's not subtext.
Anywho, the small scuffle causes Grady and Jesse to get into a little fight. They rough it out there for a second on the baseball field, and obviously, Coach Snyder punishes them by forcing them to do push-ups all afternoon. And it's here that Grady and Jesse have their first real conversation, where to assume this is kind of how they become friends. Grady also drops a big hint that Coach Snyder is gay, saying that he gets his rocks off by putting the teens through physical punishment. It kind of establishes some foundational elements to some later wet dreams of Jesse's. He also mentions here that he frequents S&M joints and likes pretty boys like you. We can see Lisa pass by here in the background because she is now stranded without a ride home because Jesse is busy doing push-ups with Grady. And apparently all done with their push-ups and all done getting dirty and sweaty for Coach Snyder, Grady and Jesse hit the shower and then get dressed. Jesse tells Grady that his parents just bought a house on Elm Street, and Grady knows exactly which one he's talking about. He tells Jesse a little tale. And I say tale because he adds to the events of the first film, but it often feels like an urban legend every time they mention what happened to Nancy.
So, some chick was locked up in that house by her mother and went crazy. She watched her boyfriend get butchered across the street by some maniac, and she lost her mind.
Jesse doesn't believe it, or at least he doesn't want to. That night, we can see Jesse tossing and turning in his bed, restless. He gets up for something to drink, but drops a glass bottle of orange juice? As he goes to clean it, he spots someone standing in the bushes that walks away, so he goes to investigate. All of a sudden he can see Freddy in the basement, feeding the furnace. Jesse then goes back inside to investigate the basement. When he sees a shadow of a man in the basement, Jesse slams the door. He starts screaming out for his dad. Somebody's trying to pull open the door, and Jesse tries to hold it shut, but he's too weak. So he lets go, running and screaming for his daddy for help, and he runs right into
Freddy Krueger.
who says,
Daddy can't help you now.
Freddy catches Jesse, grabbing him, caressing him, almost finger-fucking his mouth. The scene is very homoerotic. Freddy shushes Jesse and caresses the hair out of his eyes with his bladed claw. And apparently Robert Englund wanted to take the scene even further and stick the blade of Freddy's glove into Jesse's mouth a little. But somebody from the makeup department rushed over at the last moment and told Mark to not let him do that because if he did, it would look like he was blowing Robert Englund's finger. I mean, duh. Do you see the type of movie we're making here? Apparently nobody but Mark Patton and Robert Englund and Robert Russler really realized this script was gay. Mark tried to hide it, understandably, because this was his vessel movie. This was supposed to lead him to stardom. And he really couldn't do that in 1985, playing a closeted kid in a horror movie. I imagine this didn't really affect Robert Russler's performance too much, but sadly it made Robert Englund dial back his plans on homoeroticizing Freddy. Although Freddy is very physical with Jesse in this scene, he makes it clear that he won't kill Jesse, because he needs him. Freddy thrusts him against the wall, and with one finger he pulls his cheek towards him, forcing him to look him in the eyes. It's not hard to see the homosexual symbolism here. Jesse, being confronted by a force that he cannot control, despite how much he may want to him, a force that is being personified as a monster that his family and friends will see him as if he gives in to these desires, and despite this, Jesse almost looks turned on by Freddy's dominance.
You've got the body, I've got the brains,
Freddy says as he pulls back his own scalp, revealing the slimy brain underneath. Jesse screams like a girl, drawing the attention of his parents who are only mildly concerned.
Dad, he's a grown-ass 21-year-old man!
The next day, a sleep-deprived Jesse is understandably falling asleep in his anatomy class. His professor is trying to explain the human circulatory system using a cow's heart as a guide while Jesse is quickly drifting off to dreamland. As he begins to nod off, a snake emerges from behind him, and it slowly slithers up his body and around his neck. And as the snake grips gets tight, Jesse screams. Yeah! Waking up Jesse just as the teacher is removing the class snake from around his neck, and this prompts a scolding from the teacher. Grady laughs, and Jesse flips him the bird in a very
please
kind of way. We then transition over to Lisa, who we can see swimming in her personal pool, because she's apparently that kind of rich and has that kind of money. And frankly, the whole house is just way over the top. There's probably $1 million in landscaping alone here. And that's before we even get to the 2.5-story, 14-room mini mansion that it sits on top of. The phone rings and it's Jesse calling because he wants to hang out, and Lisa, of course, says it's a plan. Except Jesse's dad is not about it. Jesse has not cleaned up or unpacked his room. So, no hanging out, though, he unpacks or cleans his room. So, what do you do when you have a whole bunch of unpacking to do, and you don't want to do it, but it has to get done before you can hang out with your wig? You toss in an 8-track, and you get to dancing. Are you guys ready, everybody? This is the big dance number of Nightmare 2. So it's time to toss in your own 8-track, because this one comes complete with butt sways, pelvic thrusts, and bad shades, and it's all played to the song Touch Me All Night Long. Now Jesse, he unpacks for about 30 seconds before just falling full on into his dance routine. He tosses on these electric shades, and he just starts dancing and thrusting, and he starts thrusting against this toy ringing pin until it just boom, pops. Very homoerotic, and this is right as Lisa and his mom are walking in. How either of them didn't know that he was gay from this point is beyond me. Jesse is full-on booty dancing, for Christ's sake. He has a sign on his door that says, "No out-of-town chicks," and a look in his eye that says, "I put up that sign for a reason." But, ignorance is bliss, so we're just gonna move on. Lisa reveals that she came over to help out / hang out. And let's just acknowledge this right now. Lisa is so much better than Jesse deserves. She's always there for him, she's always understanding, she doesn't realize that she's a beard. Poor Lisa, she just puts in so much effort. Eagle-eyed viewers can also look out here for the fake board game probe. It's yet another big clue that this is a gay film. Still, Lisa eager to help while getting nothing in return because, although she has no idea, this is going to be an all-work, no-play kind of arrangement. So while finishing up cleaning the room, Lisa discovers a diary belonging to Nancy Thompson. She begins to read the diary, and it starts off with this very racy entry. Nancy Thompson is our final girl from the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie, by the way, and this is her journal. And she's journaling about her very successful attempts at voyeurism, writing about how she was spying on Glenn Lance from across the way. You know, the hunky boy from the first Nightmare movie. Watching him right as he was starting to strip naked, saying that she knows that she shouldn't watch him, but that part of her that wants him forces her to. This visibly excites Jesse, of course, so he plops himself down on the bed and just grabs the journal right from Lisa and just starts flipping through it, finding a passage. And as Jesse reads it, assuming it's still just talking about Glenn, taking on this very sultry voice, he starts saying, "He comes to me at night. Horrible. Ugly. Dirty. Under the sheets with me. Tearing at my nightgown with his steel claws. His name is Fred. And he keeps trying to take me to the boiler room. He wants to kill me." The story starts off all sultry, steamy, written very much like a romance novel, something that Jesse's all too happy to emphasize with his voice acting. But just as Jesse is really getting into the story, right here as it's getting hot and heavy, he quickly realizes that Nancy's not talking about Glenn. He realizes that Nancy's talking about Freddy and the events of the first movie. And Jesse remembers that story that Grady told him, the urban legend about the girl that lived in this house before him, and how she went bat crazy. That night, just like the night before, Jesse's tossing and turning from the heat in the room. Sweating profusely, he turns on the light to find the lampshade almost completely melted. Not just that, nearly everything in the room is melting like some kind of Salvador Dali painting. The lamps, the candles, his vinyl record. Jesse, now fully unable to sleep from the heat, and with a few questions about why his room is melting, decides to get dressed and go downstairs, into the basement, in an attempt to try and figure out what the heck is causing his room to get so frickin' hot. He investigates the furnace, which is off, but, like a dumb he reaches in. And when he reaches in, he finds something inside. Something tucked away, wrapped in a dirty rag. He pulls out the wrap, carefully unfolding it, to reveal Freddy's glove. And the moment he reveals the glove, the fire turns on inside the furnace, and Freddy appears, cackling.
Go ahead, Jesse. Try it on for size. Kill for me.
No!
Jesse throws the claw to the ground, throwing his hands up in the air, and turns to run, but only falls to the floor, the claw still on the ground, right next to him. Just as a note, in Jesse's room, Nohea spotted the book that Jesse happened to be reading. It's On the Road by Jack Kerouac, and he's actually read this book. It follows two straight boys who go on a big road trip together in search of self-knowledge and experience, and he found it to be littered with homoerotic subtext, especially with how much its main character obsesses over the other guy traveling with him. I think it's put best how Don Romsberg put it, a professor of women's, gender, and queer studies in California. He says, "But it's all in the service of their freedom, not ours. Being queer and reading on the road can be like that drunken one-night stand with a straight boy who won't make eye contact with you after." Should I mention that the boys have sex in the movie version? Just thought it was an interesting sub-note for the movie at large. Getting back to the movie, we switch over to the next day at school, where Jesse and Lisa are talking about Jesse's second nightmare on Elm Street. Lisa has some thoughts about what is going on. She wants to discuss it with Jesse. She proposes that maybe Jesse might have some psychic powers, But Jesse doesn't want to discuss the possibility. Luckily for him, Carrie shows up to save the day. But not before Lisa manages to snag Nancy's diary from Jesse. Carrie, meanwhile, is super excited about Lisa's pool party, and she assures us all of the cute guys are going to be there. We switch back to PE class, where Grady and Jesse are jogging together. Jesse tries to talk to Grady about the dreams he's been having, but it's soon shut down by Coach Schneider. Grady says that Schneider has a stick up his day, and Jesse responds that Snyder's always got a stick up his but unfortunately Coach Schneider is right behind them.
Hello, dirtballs!
Which is honestly great. We'll just queue up some unused stock footage of them doing some push-ups from earlier, and then we can just call this one a day. Wrap it up, boys. Later on, back at the Walsh home, the Walsh family is trying to deal with the house's heating problems. Jesse walks in and delivers his lines in the most beautifully flamboyant way here.
"My God, it is hot as an oven in here."
It's 97 degrees in the house, and on cue the birdcage starts rattling.
when Jesse pulls open the cage and one of the two lovebirds falls out just a bloody mess and the other one bites Jesse's fingers and flies out into the room. And now there's this demon bird just flying around the room. And the bird flies by and scratches Mr. Walsh's face. They actually built a demonic-looking bird, but it looked goofy as so they went with the regular bird in the final movie. And when filming this scene, the bird prop hit Luke in the face and broke his nose. He never forgave production for that one. It left him with a scar for the rest of production. Years later, Clue, now an 87-year-old man, recounts the tale in horror, because the bird caused havoc of all kinds all around the room, flying around, knocking over pieces on the set, before spontaneously combusting into fire. So this was a particularly difficult scene to shoot. So we get back to Mr. Walsh, who's getting to work tearing the kitchen apart, convinced that a leaking gas pipe is causing all of their troubles, or bird rabies, or maybe cheap seeds. Or something, because there's got to be a logical explanation.
Well, sure, birds just don't explode for no reason.
Jesse, of course, doesn't think that it could be a leaky gas line, and this, of course, turns his dad against him. Jesse's the one doing it. Mr. Walsh demands to know how he did it. Firecrackers? Cherry bomb? And this just ushers Jesse to respond in anger. You can't talk to me like that! And he leaves. Really shows his dad. Mr. Walsh, meanwhile, is just getting more and more mad with Jesse. And it really paints the picture of a dad who doesn't understand his son and is unsure of how to interact with him anymore. For a supposedly straight man, David Chaskin really did put a lot of gay issues into this movie. So we're on to another night. And another nightmare. This time when Jesse goes downstairs, lightning strikes through the window, striking the countertop, shattering the plates in the dish rack. So Jesse does the next logical thing anybody would do in this situation. He goes outside in his jammies. And admittedly, this is where things start to get strange, as Jesse ends up in an S&M bar, full of patrons, drinking, smoking, making out, all in this dirty neon basement. And Jesse is just drenched in sweat again. Drenched in sweat yet again. And he makes his way to the bar, still in his jammies, and he orders a drink from the bartender. The bartender, who just happens to be played by New Line founder Bob Shea, dressed head to toe in bondage-style black leather, and who somehow managed to walk away from this production with absolutely no idea that it was a gay film. I guess people were just that clueless in the 80s. So Jesse, he walks up and he asks for a beer, and Bob Shea grabs him one, and he cracks it open. But before Jesse can take a drink, somebody grabs him by the wrist. He turns to see who it is, and who could it be? None other than Coach Snyder, dressed head to toe in full bondage leather. And he's giving Jesse a very disapproving look. He's been a naughty boy. He's not old enough to be drinking. Then, all of a sudden, they're at school. This is a dream, by the way, so yeah, all of a sudden they're just at school, and Coach Snyder is forcing Jesse to run laps around the gym. Mysteriously now in a polo shirt and blue jeans, and as he completes his laps, Snyder shoves him into a stack of chairs, saying,
Hit the showers.
And Jesse does as he's told. I do really love how well established this little fantasy is for Jesse. He's already had this weird authoritarian issue with Coach Snyder, and Grady is always so keen to tell Jesse all about Snyder's weird pastime proclivities. Jesse takes a shower while Coach Snyder's watching. Coach Snyder, still in full S&M gear, of course, lingering in his office, waiting for Jesse to finish showering. I often wonder what Snyder's plan was for after the shower. We do see him grabbing some very ropey jump ropes, but sadly we won't get to see him use them. Before we can find out what the actual plan was, tennis racket wires begin to snap behind Snyder, and sports balls and weights of various sizes start flying at him, pelting him. Desperate, Snyder drops down. He tries to army crawl away to safety, but the jump rope on his desk wraps around his wrists, dragging him out of his office and into the showers. His clothes are stripped off of him. Bath towels begin to come to life. They start whipping him. Whipping his bare ass. And then comes the cherry on top of this sundae. We can see steam rising from the shower drains. Jesse weakens, allowing Freddy to take over. He slashes Coach Snyder across the back, gashing deep into his flesh, killing him, leaving him strung up, naked in the shower stalls. Now, I think it goes without saying that this movie gives the Freddy character a sort of duality that we don't see in many of the other movies. Because in this movie, he seems to exist as both the movie monster Freddy and also the self-imagined personification of Jesse's latent homosexuality. Jesse is trying to keep the gay from overtaking him, but it's just not that simple, and poor little Jesse, all he knows is negative stereotypes about gays. Look at how great he talks about Schneider in the first place, for Christ's sake. And now we have this very confused dream in which Jesse has some submissive fantasies with the coach that he would very much like to work out, but every time he thinks about it, the guilt and self-hate get in the way. And it's such a pin-up issue with Jesse that he's dreaming about it, but his poor subconscious is just so self-conscious that he can't even make it to the finish line. All those laps for nothing. This, by the way, is one of the few times in the series where Freddy on screen is not actually Robert Englund. When Robert Englund asked for a raise for this movie, due to the first movie's massive success, Bob Shea claimed that any old stuntman could play Freddy Krueger. So they just got another stuntman to play Freddy. And this scene that you see right here in the shower stall, this is the first scene that they shot with him, and it didn't go well. Instead of the usual Freddy that we're all used to, the new stuntman began walking around like some sort of zombie or Frankenstein's monster, and the cast and crew later nicknamed the performer Frankenfreddy because of his Frankenstein-like stature when he was performing. They fired him right after this scene and rehired Robert back to finish the rest of the movie. Thank goodness. Frankenfreddy does sort of fit for this one scene, however, just because it's supposed to be Jesse. So Jesse is now standing there, naked, wearing nothing but Freddy's glove on his right hand, and he's standing over the body of his dead former lover, Coach Schneider, and looking at the bloody claw. Seeing what he has done, Jesse once again screams like a little girl. And any real possibility that this might have been a dream is kind of dashed when Jesse is found later that night by the police, who take him back to his home, where his parents are understandably confused. His dad asking,
"What drugs have you been taking? And who you getting them from? Who's your supplier? Who's got the goods, Jesse boy? Who you getting the nails from, kid?"
Nails?
You know, nails, glue sticks, the paper planes.
Wait, what?
Oh, geez, this kid's all winded up already, isn't he?
Yeah, boss, I think so.
Winded up?
Don't act dumb, kid. We both know you're blasting your life away, torching up the Tokamon skins.
Want me to rub him up a little bit, boss?
Yeah. A little more. Maybe just for love. There we go.
God damn it, I'm not taking any drugs.
I just have to step in and sort everything out like usual. So, Jesse, or Nohea, or whoever's who in this little bit that you're both doing, Ken, Alan, or whoever the hell you is, I'm sorry, hun, but he doesn't want to talk to you about it. I don't know what to tell you. He didn't want to talk about it with me last night, and he wouldn't talk about it with me this morning. Now, Nohea, Jesse, I'm sorry you have to hear this from me, but your father is in the process of taking the steel bars off the windows. They should be gone by the time you get home. No, I'm sorry, hon, but they're killing the resale value.
So next morning, Mr. Walsh is busy removing the bars from the window, and Mrs. Walsh is trying to get Jesse to talk to her about what's going on. I'm going to put this small little bit of dialogue here.
I have a problem I have to work out on my own.
Yeah, I know, but something's bothering you.
Mom!
And we're just concerned about you, Jesse.
I'm fine, just leave me alone.
Can we at least talk about it?
No!
I've said it before and I'll say it again. This dialogue is meant for a coming out story. You have a mother who knows something is wrong, a son who doesn't want to talk about it, and a dad who doesn't know how to handle it.
Oh no, part 1 is ending. Stay tuned to part 2 to find out if Jesse can actually manage to come out of the closet and accept himself. Will Lisa finally realize the truth? That there's no end game to this game? And maybe move on to a more achievable target? And will Jesse's gay angst finally be quenched with his best bro sleepover? Or will his awkward teenage phase simply serve as a portal for evil, opening the doors of hell, and allowing a bisexual janitor the key to his young teenage mind? Stay tuned to part 2 to find out.